Welcome to the Knife Junkie podcast, your weekly dose of knife news and information about knives and knife collecting. Here's your host, Bob the Knife Junkie DeMarco.
Welcome to the Knife Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Bob DeMarco. On this edition of the show, I'm speaking with master martial artist, knife collector, and Renaissance man, Rolando Garcia III, also known as Rolanda Estocada. Rolando is a lifelong martial artist who began his training at the ripe old age of 4. He has mastered numerous fighting arts, achieving full instructor credentials under some of the greats. He studied the fighting arts of the Philippines, Japan, Brazil, France, America, and I'm sure others. But it's this broad and deep perspective that truly gives him a wealth of knowledge and makes his blade-centric YouTube channel called Rolanda Estocada an amazing and entertaining resource. He also has the ultimate collection of knives and swords. We'll meet Rolando and talk about everything, but first be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and of course download the show to your favorite podcast app. And if you'd like to help support the show, quickest way to do that is to scan the QR code on your screen or go to TheKnifeJunkie.com/Patreon. Again, that's TheKnifeJunkie.com/Patreon.
Adventure Delivered, your monthly subscription for hand-picked outdoor, survival, EDC, and other cool gear from our expert team of outdoor professionals. TheKnifeJunkie.com/BattleBox. Rolando, welcome to the show, sir.
Bob, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So before we got started, we were talking a little bit. You live in New York City, have for quite some time, long enough to remember this. And I'm going to see if you remember this place. It was called Roseland Martial Arts, and it was in Times Square.
Yes, of course.
Okay, I mention that place all the time because I got some great cold steels there. I don't know if you met Rose. She was the woman who owned the place.
Yes.
It was like a 50-foot cabinet of cold steel knives there.
Yes. And I think that was not only there were so many brands, but it was my first exposure to the so-called Chinese junk, right? So
Yeah.
you leave the place, like it would be me and my classmates, and you'd leave with a bunch of videos. And in those days, there was no YouTube. So if you wanted to even learn like the most recent armbar variation coming out of Brazil, or the new James Keating Bowie knife video, she'd always leave you, oh, this is for you, I like you, and then you're leaving with like a knockoff of a Buck 110 or a Bali song, and you love it. It falls apart in 2 weeks. But yes, those were the good old days.
Those were the good old days. No place like that anymore in New York City. I think Paragon Sports might sell Sabenzas or that kind of thing, but
not anymore.
Oh.
Not anymore. I visited there a year ago, and the pandemic wiped out their collection. Yeah, I know. They might have a couple of Columbia River, but those were the days when I know what you're talking about. They had Sabenzas, they had all types of custom makers there. They had quite the collection, but even them, no, they moved away from it.
Well, before we started here, I was doing a little research on you, watching some videos. I mean, I watch your Bowie videos a lot, but I was watching some Navaja videos this morning, and I decided I should look up the word Estocada because Garcia is your last name, and I wanted to know what Estocada means. And it's basically the coup de grace that a matador delivers at the end of a bullfight.
Yes.
Tell me about the origin of that and how you got into martial arts.
So when I started, when my father exposed me to martial arts when I was 4 years old, he was a martial artist himself. He was an attorney in the Philippines, and he was an attorney in the Philippines in the 1970s. And so for anybody who knows their Philippine history understands that in the 1970s, it was martial law. It was a pure dictatorship, and just maybe several decades after World War II. So the Philippines was just coming out of their Wild West era, because it was a true Wild West era after World War II. A lot of Filipino martial artists had just come back from Mark King's guerrillas, and those were the guerrillas that were fighting side by side with the Americans against the Imperial Japanese. But once World War II was over and there was independence, a lot of Filipino martial artists, whether they knew it or not, had some form of PTSD. So there were all types of duels, all types of fights, and that's where my father's instructor, Felicissimo Dizon, he came out of that era, and he was friends with Antonio Illustrissimo of Calis Illustrissimo, Angel Cabales, who was his, I would say his Sancho Panza, and I say that very respectfully, because he's a master in and of himself. And then not long after that, there was another generation of martial arts instructors and students, and that was my dad, who learned it from Felicissimo Dizon. And he had to learn it because not only was there martial law, there was just all types of fights, whether it was a fight among civilians, but also with law enforcement. And you had to really know what you were doing. So, and those were days that he doesn't really like to talk about, but he did learn a form of kung fu called kuksut, which I cannot find anywhere. But apparently, their hazing has something to do. Their hazing initiation has something to do with getting beat up with rubber hoses, and you had to survive something. Yeah, there was like all types of horrible experiences, but he had kuksut. He was a brown belt under Sensei Hiroshi, who was the National Bureau of Investigation's judo instructor. So he was a brown belt there. But he also learned Filipino martial arts from one of the greats, Felicissimo Dizon. And I learned directly from my dad from the time I was 4 years old. And his first way of exposing me to it, especially in the 70s, is all types of black belt theater, Bruce Lee movies. And but he also made sure to expose me to a lot of books. So he wanted to be sure that on the one hand, I knew how to defend myself. You're a kid growing up in the 80s in the Philippines, you're just going to get into fights. It's a very macho culture. So on the one hand, you had to be able to defend yourself, but on the other hand, you had to be able to read your books. So to this day, I still have my library of books, as you've seen in my videos. But from there, I went through, this is, I think, everybody in the 1980s. You go through Taekwondo. But when he saw that I was really super serious with it, it started to expose me to the Dizon method, specifically Doce Pares. And I studied that from the time I was about 14 till about 20 years old. Then I moved to New York. And after that, maybe, I had my own training group with a bunch of, one of them was a Taekwondo Olympian. And those were the days of the early UFC. And so I kind of had this own early UFC group. Nothing crazy. Nobody got hurt or anything. But it was kind of UFC-ish, Dog Brother-ish. We just rent a space somewhere and we just went at it, right? And, there were no rules. So you just went at it, right? But around I would say, not now, I'm about 27 years old at that time. And I had met my Jeet Kune Do instructor, Armando Basulto. And he was at the time a regional East Coast director and senior instructor under Paul Vunak. Mm-hmm. And those were when Vunak was Vunak. Yeah. Those were hardcore days. And I had a conversation with my instructor recently, and he said, the stuff that I taught you guys and the format I taught you guys in, there was he had maybe, it was, you can't do it now. You can't teach it that way anymore because it's the old Vunak method from 1988 to 1992, where 3-on-1, 4-on-1, 5-on-1 with weapons, all those things, doors locked, you can't go outside, you don't sign waivers, you just go in with your honor. And then the name Estocada came about because my practice was evolving. So I asked both my dad, my instructor, and my instructor Armando Basulto, I said, is there a way for me to name my own practice because it has evolved so much? And I was normally, you name your practice after you so that it differentiates. Mm-hmm. So I landed on the term Estocada. And the Estocada is the final sword in a bullfight, from what I understand. It's the Spanish word means thrust, right? And my dad and I had a really good conversation about this as to why Estocada itself is important, because from how I understand it, the Estocada is used when it's the coup de grace. It's the final sword used to basically put the animal out of its misery. But there is a way that the bullfighter has to do it so that it's viewed as, in a way, honorable and if also merciful. So there's honor and then there's mercy. One, you have to face the bull. Number two, you have to do it in such a way so that when you do thrust the sword, it has to be right through in the fleshy portion of the shoulder of the bull, so that when it charges you, you have one shot at it and it goes straight into the heart, which ultimately ends the bull. So the philosophical underpinnings of the Estocada term in Rolanda Estocada is that you got to face your problems, whatever it happens to be. And there is a higher call towards elegance and cultivation, in that you have one shot at this. And for those who look at bullfighting, once that thing goes after you, and if you even flinch for a moment, that bull has no respect for you. It's just going to glance off. The sword is going to glance off of it. It's going to end up goring you. And in a way, it's become my metaphor for my own personal life and my own personal practice. Face your problem head on. And just to add a little bit more of a challenge, try to finish it elegantly and in one shot.
I got to say, I really love and respect the concept of elegance. I mean, I think, I mean, you seem to be someone who I saw on your bookshelf. You have something about modern style. You know, gentlemen. You know how gentlemen dress. It's not just about the brutality of being able to use a knife to win a fight, but there's also, you know, self-respect and presenting yourself to the world in such a way that is maybe people won't even want to fight you. So I respect that sort of idea of elegance. But in terms of the Estocada method as it is seen in combat or in self-defense, what kind of defines that style?
I would say it's weapons based. You know, on the simplest level, it's weapons based. Because if we were to take, it's in many ways it's founded on the JKD philosophy, right? Which is, you know, absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. And so when Bruce Lee started to study all of these other systems, he was really trying to come up with his own. It's very similar to Einstein, where he was trying to come up with his own grand unified theory of martial art. No belt, no labels, just one really elegant way of expressing combat, which is ultimately personalized. I built on that, and I thought, well, his focus was primarily empty hands. Because by the time he was in the United States in the 1950s and 1960s, there were a lot of rules when it came to weapons. But it was during a time where self-defense was something that was important, because there were a lot of things happening in the United States at the time in the 60s with a lot of the radical changes. But also the idea of urban crime was coming, right? But because of the way the laws were set up, and the way urban crime was starting to rise, there was an emphasis on self-defense as something that was practical. I took a look at this and I thought, well, I think that's good for what it was for its time. But as Guru Dan Inosanto evolved it, he started to add the weapons-based aspect. And it's not because of any sort of oversight on Bruce's part. He just didn't live long enough to see it all the way through. But the weapons part of it, I think, is ultimately important, because to me, weapons taps into the secret app of arthrokinetics and biomechanics that is just native to who we are as human beings. You necessarily won't understand your true martial capabilities, both from a physical standpoint, but also from a spiritual standpoint, until you've actually held a true weapon in your hand. You won't understand what you're capable of until you know how to brandish something like a custom Bagwell. This is the righty custom Bagwell that I have here. Once you start to explore martial art from the perspective of being able to take life, I believe the Japanese term for that is setsunin. I think it's setsuninto, which is to be able to take life. But then to give life, katsuninto, to be able to spare life. Those are things that you don't necessarily consider when you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or boxing or doing a Muay Thai class, right? So my Estocada is ultimately this philosophy of the study of giving life, but ultimately the responsibility of possibly taking a life if need be.
That is something that doesn't get mentioned much. I mean, you could accidentally take a life just from cold cocking someone or giving someone a decent punch, they fall, hit their head, that kind of thing. I talk about this a lot. I mention this to my daughters a lot too, who I'm kind of showing some of this stuff to, is that you really could trip someone up. I love sweeps and the kind of thing that if you're being careful, you could actually be very gentle with. But if you're not careful, they could fall and hit their head, and then that's it. And you have to be prepared for all of those kind of eventualities. That's interesting. Take a life or save a life. Take a life if absolutely necessary.
Yeah. My father once taught me, son, there are only two mistakes in martial arts. What are those, Dad? Well, the first one is to kill a man you did not intend to kill. I said, okay, that makes sense. What's the other mistake? Well, to not kill a man that you intended to kill. I'll keep those in mind, Dad. Thank you.
Okay, so we've mentioned a bit of your training. Your by the way, I mean we're talking Savate, we're talking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, some sort of Japanese martial art. I don't even know. I'm assuming it might be a sword-based art.
It is.
You're a kettlebell coach under the great Pavel Tsatsouline, which is amazing. But something that I'm really, really intrigued by, because I'm born and bred American, is the Bowie fighting. And you just pulled out that beautiful Bill Bagwell custom-made Bowie. Tell me about your investigation into Bowie fighting, where it started, and how you got to know Bill Bagwell. And let's get into that.
And again, my great martial arts instructor, Jeet Kune Do instructor, Armando Basulto, he introduced me to it. And me being Filipino and being raised in the Filipino Dizon fashion, Dizon was actually not a knife guy. He did not promote it because he was coming up during a time where Bali songs were so prevalent, because after World War II, there was so much junk just laying around, scrap metal, that there was this boom in the 1950s and 60s of just this amazing production of great quality Bali song. But because of that, they were just being used for all types of nefarious reasons. So by the time he got to my dad, he emphasized to my dad, do not emphasize knife training with your future students or even your sons, right? So by the time I got to my instructor, I was not a knife guy. Believe it or not, I was trained in Filipino, but I was not a knife guy. But we did some drills when I was there, but I was never really attracted to it. And he said, "Hey, so you know what? You should take a look at the Bowie knife, because that might be something you might be interested in." No, I'm not a knife guy. Sifu, I am not a knife guy. And then one day, my first introduction to a Bowie knife was, of all things, a Pakistani Bowie. So it's made in Pakistan. And he was like, "Hey, check it out." He just has this way of just, "Hey, check it out. This is a Bowie knife." And I said, "Sifu, I told you I'm not into that." And then he put it in my hand, and something just, every ancestor in my genes just said, "Oh!" It just did one of those. I thought, I was speechless, right? Because it felt like it could move like a stick. It somehow awakened something in me from a movement standpoint. And of course, I had to study it. I had to read everything about it. In fact, during those days when Paladin Press was still a thing, I read this book like it was my Bible. This is Bill Bagwell's now out of print Bowie's knife and book, which is just completely amazing. I mean, even just the photos, if you can see that, of his own knives, and if you can take a look at the cover, I was enthralled by it. But what really caught my eye about it was when he talked about how you could end an altercation within seconds, which to me, when you think of knife fighting, it's a relatively long, drawn out thing. And again, I grew up in the Philippines. So this is like, when a fight is a fight, it goes on for a while, right? Even when a knife is involved. But he had this idea that it could end certain things. And he talks about the back cut. What the heck is a back cut? What is that? Well, the sharpened false edge in the back, and you can flip it down.
Show us what you're talking about.
So if this is the Bobby Rain's Rainmaker Damascus Bowie in brass, and this is the S guard. So when we think of knife, this is what we think of, right? the Norman Bates, right? This is what we're thinking of with the background music. But what he was talking about was a back cut where instead of just slashing or thrusting or even snap cutting, his idea was, and this is again from James Keating and Bill Bagwell, the idea that this sharp and false edge, if I just turn my thumb down, not only is that steel leading flesh, so it's hard to get my hand as a target, but the fact that the entire mass of the blade, now that it's developed this momentum, all of that mass is going to concentrate into this needle point tip. And this is the part that's the actual killer. According to James Keating, the target is the left part of the forehead, because in fact, you can do it right now. He said that there's a natural blind spot right here. So if I take my hand right here, I can see it, I can see it, I can see it. And right about here, I cannot actually see it. There's a natural blind spot. So that's right there, right? You can't see it.
Yeah.
So when you do that back cut with this knife and you go pop right about here, when I ate it in sparring, it was the worst feeling in the world, because it feels like a piano just got dropped on your head. You're moving, and it feels like a piano got dropped on your head, and that's a plastic sparring knife. So the thought of this wonderfully engineered Bowie knife was something that had been created. I thought that was majestic. I purchased the Ontario Bagwell version, and those were the days when it was relatively secretive what the steel composition was. Someone thought it was 440C, someone said 440A. But then I had to go through blade forums, and somebody said, well, Mastersmith Bill Bagwell does not do email. It does not do anything on the internet. So you're going to have to call him. And I got in touch with Mike, the late Mike Sostry, gave me his phone number, and I called Bill. And his wife, Cedra, answered, and Cedra's Filipina. Oh. So she and I got to talking. Then she put me on the phone with Bill. And then Bill, he took this kind of mentoring kind of interest in me. I don't know why, but he just took this interest in me. And he always had this, kind of high pitch, this, beautiful, Texas voice. Now, Rolando, like he would always say, now, Rolando, you ought to. It's always like, you ought to, right? And he would kind of talk me through it on the phone, where this is how you do a back cut. This is how you do a snap cut. This is how your shoulder turns. And so to have him on the one side of my education in terms of just the mentoring and coaching, and then the reviewing of videos with Bill Bagwell, and then my instructor Armando, who put us in these sparring scenarios with those three pillars in place, I'm very grateful to all three gentlemen for that kind of education, which I don't think you can get anymore. I ended up ordering 3 directly from him, a righty-lefty custom Bagwell, and then a Damascus Bagwell. And that's an overview of my history.
Well, let's see those knives.
Oh yeah. So this is the first one. This one is the righty, because I asked him for a righty-lefty version, because I wanted to explore double Bowie fighting, which isn't a thing, because carrying 2 buoys wasn't a thing. But this is the yeah, I know, dog bone style. But this is the real detail, and I still remember being on the phone with him. I said, Bill, could you do this? And then he was like, Ando, that's gonna be a beep. It's like really something that's gonna be hard to do. But you see these little pins that he threw in there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like knurling, but those are actual pins, right?
Yeah, those are pins he threw in. And what he did, and it's very hard to tell, but if you look at the cross section of it, you see how the handle and then the guard the handle is slightly angled. That's because he engineered it so that it matched up with how my shoulder is ever so slightly raised, so that when I think I'm lined up, the edge lines up slightly to the right. So this is the difference between a custom knife maker who understands the anatomy, but also understands knife combat, Bowie knife combat. And this goes out to knife makers all over. Study your customer from a biomechanical, anatomical perspective to really customize it for them. Because now this is the left right-handed version, and the left-handed one is very interesting because the angle is, you see how it's slightly, you see how it's very different.
Yeah.
Because he said everybody has some degree of shoulder depression and shoulder protraction. He said if you ever get a custom suit, which I ended up getting at some point, he said even your tailor will tell you that there is such a thing, right? So you can't make a right Bowie knife. You can't make a right Bowie knife to the exact same spec as a left Bowie knife, because just when you think you're going to end up cutting, a portion of his anatomy, you might be cutting his shirt because the angle is completely off.
Yeah.
So this is that righty lefty.
I'm noticing, looking at these, the quillions are different. I love the Bagwell style upward facing quillions with the Spanish notch. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So this one, notice that it's just a little taller.
Yeah.
And it kind of bisects this portion here, the Spanish notch. Whereas this one is actually, if you can see it, it's lower.
Yeah.
Right? It's lower than the Spanish notch. Whereas here, it comes all the way through. This was his idea, not my idea. I just call him and, hey, you're the master. You tell me what I need to do, right? What are you going to make, right? So he had this here. He said, just on the chance, right, that somehow the blade can catch.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and I can talk you through that. And he kind of did. And I loved the things that he said. But I thought, I'm never going to pull that off. I'm just never going to pull that off. But his idea was that at some point, edges are just going to catch. And the blade ends up catching kind of this way. You see how that kind of catches right there?
Yeah.
And the idea was that you can leverage it. And just me doing this a little bit, you can feel it like, oh my God, what leveraging there. But he did not think that this was the function of this particular Devil's Horn guard. He made this slightly shorter because he viewed this as the sniper that comes from the outside. So this comes forward, right? This is the heavy shock troops. And if you end up having to catch, you can leverage. But this is the one that comes from, as I angle off, this is the one that comes from nowhere. This is the one that comes in and just, he doesn't see it. That's the idea that he had.
So if you're just listening, we're talking about two Bagwell Bowies, one made for the right hand that has an extended quillion that goes slightly above the Spanish notch, there to catch a blade and kind of leverage it out of your opponent. But the left-handed version of this has a different quillion and a different Spanish notch because it's not doing the same job. It's kind of coming in clutch as the sniper and doing some sort of a strike when the other knife is bound up with the right. This is brilliant. I didn't actually realize that looking at the pictures of these two. Well, until you mentioned it here. I'm interested also in there's how I've read about it. There's some Bowie knife fighting that is kind of based. I have a Laredo trainer. Laredo, I love the Laredo.
I have that one, yeah.
There's a lot of Bowie knife fighting that kind of came out of saber fighting. So maybe the more educated, more cultivated individual who knew how to saber fight in a traditional European sense using a Bowie. But then there's the mountain man style with the swedge forward or the false edge forward. Tell us a little bit about that. I know you've trained a lot of that.
So and I'll mention this also because there's a third system, and actually was Guru Dan Inosanto who kind of brought this to my attention.
Oh.
So you have the saber fighting one, and with Jim Bowie and his brother Reason Bowie, he had they were of Scottish descent, so they're going to come from a Scottish blade standpoint, right? So you have 1, 2, and then you have the back cut coming in this way because you're going to have sharp and false edge. So you have this kind of business that's happening. However, you do have this other business where it's edge up. And this is the Rainmaker Bowie here. And he designed it so that, because not all buoys can accommodate the right wrist alignment, both in the edge down orientation versus the edge up orientation. Now, from all the Bowie aficionados that I've dealt with, this one is not the favored one for a very simple reason. You lose the back cut. The back cut is that it moves so fast that it doesn't register to the human eye. And the way Bill mentions it in his own book and the way he demonstrated it to me is that the way the aperture of the eye is set up, the way it registers images, I forget the rate of it, but the movement of the thumb from this position to this position, it doesn't register to the human eye, which means that the Bowie knife, when it does this, that back cut doesn't register. So the main takeaway of this edge up orientation is that you lose the back cut. You don't have the back cut capability, right? But why do I like this particular one? And I think it completes your training is because when you are in a defensive position, I don't think this is an offensive position. I think this is deep. This is offensive, right? Edge down so you can back cut. But as you are having to kind of give way, you have to give some sort of ground, and they don't see it, and you turn your shoulder, and then all of a sudden it's edge up. You can slice up, angle off, and then now you have this. Now you can hit vagus nerve, trachea, brachial artery, that entire line. And that's what I really like about this one, because the ability to go from back at Bowie flow, give ground, turn the shoulder, come up, and then go all the way down those arteries that I just mentioned, that's really quick. But in my opinion, from sparring experience, that works best when you have somebody who wants to cover ground and wants to advance. That's the one that I think that's where it works best from a sparring standpoint. There is a third one, and Guru Dan was the one who mentioned it in one of the workshops that I attended. I've been trying to look this up, but this is what he claimed. There are two reasons why he thinks that there is some Filipino influence on Bowie knife fighting. Two reasons. One, Jim Bowie's knife, not his knife, his wife. So Jim Bowie's wife, from what I understand, was part Filipina. Like she had some relatives in the Philippines, right? So is it possible that she could have taught him? Maybe that's possible, but I think the more likely scenario is what happened with Bill Bagwell himself. His wife is Filipina. So when I would be on the phone with him, he said, oh yeah, when we would visit the Philippines, he would spar with her uncles who were Filipino martial artists.
Wow.
He would spar with them, right? And but I'll tell you this story. He said they got so frustrated with the back cut. At one point, one of the uncles like faked an angle number one and did a stepping side kick to him. Yeah, but I'm sure that there was some crossover, if anything, if the relatives came over, right? So that's one. The other one is the fact that Jean Lafitte, who was the famous pirate in Louisiana, from what I understand, he got all kinds of pirates from all over the world. And one of the famous pirate groups happens to be in the Philippines, and they were of Chinese descent. They were called the Limahong. And I would not be surprised if some Limahong pirates came over from the Philippines, joined up with Jean Lafitte, and Jean Lafitte is a famous Bowie knife practitioner as well. He used it. So I can see how some of that made its way into it, because the back cut is very similar to, but not exactly, very similar to the Cebuano Dosipares technique of a loptic, which is yeah.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, like the back cut to me is always kind of like a Wittek, kind of horizontal.
Yeah, it's the loptic. I was told. So the Wittek is like to the front, right? So you're doing this business with it. So the idea is that if this is a stick, it's to the front. So it's coming in this way, or it's to the top of the head. I was told that one of the grandmasters of Cebuano de Sipares back in the days when he would spar, Dionisio Cañete, his loptic was the idea that instead of this, it would kind of back cut, but since this is a stick, it would be to the back of the head.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it would be to the back. That was his favorite technique. It would be angle one, bring it around, then to the back of the head, like just crack you back. So you'd get hit here. Then from there, he would Wittek. I was like, wow, that is a crazy technique. But clearly it's different because the back cut is not to the back of the head. It's either here and all the way across all those arteries. But I think I can see some of the crossover, one from a historical standpoint, but also from my own personal practice. But I would not go so far as to say that it's Filipino influence. I don't think so. I think there are just way too many other things that makes it its own thing.
So let me ask you this: the Randall knives, especially the number one, which was used a lot in World War One. I've heard of something called the Randall fighting method, where it is false edge forward, and I think that's why there's that choil kind of on the back of a Randall there, so that you can use it like this. Do you have any idea how people were taught to use those?
Here's how I understand it, right? So this is a Randall Nordic Nordic special, right?
God,
so
beautiful.
Yes, and this is just for Dave Harvey Nordic knives, and it's supposedly after, like, this is the late development gentleman's Bowie. So if you happen to be on one of those boats in Louisiana and you're playing poker there, one of the more well-heeled would have like a really super fancy like carry Bowie knife, which I think it's a gent's knife, right?
Yeah.
But the idea behind it, yes, to your point, the idea of holding it this way, right? But from what I understand, this wasn't on a one-on-one situation. It wasn't necessarily this. From what I understand, it was held this way for the edge coming towards for sentry removal.
Oh,
that's how I understand it.
Okay.
That they designed it this way so that if they were, and those were the days, it was World War II, Battle of the Bulge, going across Europeans, Nazis were everywhere. Our American GIs would be in the bushes, just like in the John Wayne movies, sneak up on one of the Nazi bad guys, grab them, and just go.
Right. I get you, for cutting the throat.
Yes, but from what I understand, the current American Bowie knife evolution, which was built off of the Randall 1718, really came to the fore when we were in Vietnam and we were looking at special observations group, and it became the weapon of choice in tunnel clearing, and some of that technology made its way when we went to Afghanistan for cave clearing. So there was a choice in terms of special forces, in terms of what you were going to use for cave clearing. Are you looking at PSYOC tactical group with the emphasis on this the tomahawk that Guru Rafael Kayanan had created, or are you looking at the American Bowie knife? I've heard several stories on the American Bowie knife version that makes me believe that was an excellent choice as far as cave clearing was concerned, because it was very direct. Like, once they encountered enemy combatant and you're in a cave and you do one of these, you do a back cut from nowhere, that guy's going down. He's neutralized.
Yikes.
Yeah.
So we're talking about kind of that Mac V SOG shape, that double peaked Bowie that opens up a giant channel.
Yeah.
If you will.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oof.
Yeah. It's and when the stories I was told, and this is where Bill himself, he did not like the idea of teaching the whole system. And I said, well, why is that? He said, well, because at the time he was teaching in Fort Bragg. He was teaching there. And he said the whole thing can be taught in 30 minutes. And if you take somebody who is fit and he's well trained, but then he has a superior Bagwell combat knife, yeah, you're looking at somebody who is going to be really deadly in under 30 minutes. In under 30 minutes. When he put it that way, I thought, yeah, I'm going to be really careful in how I disseminate this also. Yeah.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this, just moving along from the Bowie a little bit. What do you think of some of the more, I think they're modern, they're more modern styles of fighting, like South African gang Piper, Piper fighting, or Medusa, which comes out of the prison systems, or Libre knife fighting with the Pikal style. Tell me, because you have a deep background in some of these more traditional knife fighting techniques. Some of these others, like Piper, Medusa, Libre, they're a little more modern. Or what do you think of those kind of styles?
I think they're worth studying and definitely worth exploration. And there's a lot there. They do have a lot to offer. It's part of the way I've set up my own Estocada philosophy of teaching is that it's dictated by the length of the blade, right? So if you take a look at the TCAL 007, which drops tomorrow, right? You have this one, right? This is a good, appropriate length for those systems. But that said, Bill himself would say, these were his words to me. He'd say, now, son, why would you take this little itty bitty to a knife fight? That's what he would call these knives, right? But in his world and in his mindset, carrying a Bowie knife, he lived in Texas, was just what you did.
Yeah.
Right. So it really depends on, first of all, are you first responder? Are you environmental health specialist? Are you law enforcement? Do your regulations, do your laws allow you to carry those types of things, right? Because it really does depend on what you can carry legally, what you can get away with. New York, it has to be under 4 inches. It has to be completely concealed. So as much as I'd love to carry a Bagwell with me, right, or a Rainmaker with me, of a particular size, of course, I feel really safe walking around with something like this on me, right?
Yeah.
The lack of practicality is just not there, right? Now, is it legal to carry something like, let's say, your standard classic Buck 110? Absolutely. Can you use it for self-defense? You could. Is it optimal? Well, the fact that there's no ergonomic gripping on it, maybe not. The fact that you now have a fixed blade with good ergos on it, designed as a tactical scalpel, then yes. Now those systems come in because those systems also have a lot of emphasis on concealability, right? And rapid striking. So that's where something like those, especially born out of the environments where they were born out of, there's a reason why they were born out of that. I like that they're open with it. I like that they are considering the kind of small knife aspect of things. But I think ultimately, if you're going to decide to study that, you got to take a look at the environment where those come from, right? You're looking at South Africa, the incarceration prison systems, and you're going to have to study that mindset as well. And I don't know if everybody has the appetite for that kind of mindset.
Yeah, it's not dueling. It's a little different. It's this is a Mamushi from Gross Motor Gear. I just got this, but this guy does amazing work. Sean Old is his name, but it comes from a hidden spot. It's a surprise technique, and then it's kind of gross motor. Well, this is called the gross motor gear, but you're using gross motor motions. It's less nuanced. And it more relies on your caveman reactions.
Yeah, I mean, here's I love that. That's beautiful. And I have here the Peregrine, right, from RMJ, right?
Yeah.
But then take a look at that, right? Take a look at how the finger can go in here, right? So then if you're looking at from a tactical standpoint, from a hidden blade standpoint, maybe I'm at a bar and I'm training in this method, and I'm like this, and I have my arms crossed like this. Okay, sure. And I decide to do something like this that goes across you got to be able to justify, right? So you have a paraclaw, and then all of a sudden I pull this out, right? And then this comes across. You got to be able.
Wait, what is that? Show us that. What is that?
This is a paraclaw. So you have a paracord over here, but then it has a blade.
I love that.
Right? So you're here. You have it cross, you're talking, and all of a sudden the guy starts wailing on you, and you say, oh, no, wait, please stop. No, don't, please hit. And you do one of these, it unsnaps, and it comes right across this way, and it indexes to your thumb. Now just think about how many times in a boxing match somebody gets accidentally thumbed in the eye.
Yeah.
So the thumb is natural indexing. So there's a lot of intelligent design when it came to the paraclaw, which is Now, if you have like a peregrine where it's along the index finger and I'm just pointing at something, right? But then you have to be able to explain it in the court of law.
Yeah.
So wait, so this was a hidden tool, right? Yes. What caused it? Well, so you have to have that narrative and be ready for it. I think it's really good to study. The only thing I'm not crazy about, and this is where my Estocada philosophy differs, is that just like Bill Bagwell said, all right, you learn it in 30 minutes. Now you're a really good Bowie knife fighting machine. Now what? What did you learn about your own biomechanics? What did you learn about how, and this is where the Shinkaguryu, the Japanese swordsmanship that I study, Setsuninto and Katsuninto, the ability to take life versus to give life. Once I draw this, this isn't about giving life.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a martial system that is, when push comes to shove, you're at the 11th hour. The Nazi zombies are coming for you. All right. And this is all you got? Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and do that. Right. But does it leave you an option to even think or consider possibly giving life? Not necessarily. So my Estocada philosophy has always been, if you're training with the Bowie knife, how much of life is that giving you as well? How much is it improving your own self-awareness? So if you have something as narrow as the systems that you mentioned, okay, that's great. But just know that on the other side of that, you have to explore different paradigms so that it's not just about, oh, well, when they come in, I can do my thing, versus the rest of your life, you get to talk about and enjoy other things as well.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think that, especially given what you were saying, Bill Bagwell was talking about, you can be a deadly guy in a half hour. Do you think that the lifelong study of martial arts and these fighting arts also instills a morality along the way that allows you to be more judicious with it?
I'd like to think so. Yes, I'd like to think so. And this is where the ones that I actually ended up studying are two figures, right? Kami Izumi no Kami Nobutsuna, the founder of Shinkaguryu. And Shinkaguryu, it was the official swordsmanship system that was taught to the shogun during the Edo period, right? That was the one he decided on. It was between that, Katori Shitoryu, and Itoryu. But he was, the shogun at the time was so impressed by Yagyu, I think it was his father, but he ultimately studied from Yagyu Munenori. And Yagyu Munenori was greatly influenced by Takuan Soho. You know, when you order sushi and you have that little yellow pickle, that's named after him. That's Takuan, right?
Oh.
Yeah. And he was, a lot of Buddhist monks in Japan at the time were actually from samurai stock. So in his collected letters to Yagyu Munenori, and the name of the book is The Unfettered Mind, he talks about how swordsmanship, the study of swordsmanship, actually leads to an awareness of yourself, right? So that's one. But then ultimately, the other source of study that, in terms of the search of morality, led me to Yamaoka Teshu, the famous samurai who was not only known for his calligraphy and being a kendo champion, he was the guy who helped end the Boshin War, the civil war in Japan. So it was the restoration of the Meiji line of emperors in a bloodless way. But what it ultimately leads to, the study of martial art ultimately begins with a search for certainty and certitude. Just like all those old martial arts that we see. You ever notice that? It's like, well, in this figure, if he does this, then you do this. And if he does this, then you do that. You're looking at strict causality.
Yeah.
When you look at it from that perspective, every student who studies any martial art is looking for strict causality and certainty. What the blade does, whether it's a Bowie knife or a samurai sword or a Piper system knife, it introduces uncertainty, not only from your own sense of your own existence and your own self-preservation, but even an uncertainty of your own morality. Because if you have this capability to take a life of somebody who may have insulted you or may have even threatened your life, a questioning of your own morality at its highest certitude, only the blade can provide that, in my experience. And that's why the study of it is so broad, not just from a skill standpoint, but from the constant refinement and cultivation of one's character, not only as a human being, but ultimately as a warrior.
And it requires a tremendous amount of skill to become good at, and like you said, dedication and time. So how do you feel about the relevance of all of that training and all of those years of blood, sweat, and tears in the age of the gun, where someone could have a gun in their waistband and change things very quickly? How do you feel about guns?
There's a great I love guns, and I'll tell you this. There's a great line in Enter the Dragon where Bruce Lee says, why doesn't somebody just go and take a 45 and bang, settle it, right? And then their excuse in Enter the Dragon was, well, the bad guy, in order to be on his island, you can't have guns. And Bruce goes, oh, right. That's nice and convenient. The one problem with the gun that I have is that it's not an educative tool. The gun is a marvel of engineering, meaning it makes my life so easy that if I want to make any significant impact on this reality to end and take another person's life, it's a pull of a trigger, right?
Yeah.
If I'm going to move with the Bowie knife or a samurai sword, there are several main considerations. One of them is biomechanical, meaning am I positioned correctly? Am I firing the right neural sequence, the right activation of muscles? Am I breathing correctly? But most of all, is my mindset correct? Is my mind clear? Takawan Soho was writing to Yagyu Minonori, and he said that if your mind stops at anything at all, if you fixate on the guard, his stance, his style, his uniform, you will get cut down. That was his view. So if your mind is the enemy. So what the blade does ultimately is not only does it take you down this path of self-awareness, but really to the very nature of this reality that we all live in, meaning you are experiencing it directly in a way so that you have something where if you hold it judiciously, even if you don't have an opponent in front of you, you're perfecting yourself in a way that you can, as you're moving, you are also reflecting on your capability to give life and ultimately take life. And in the words of, I think it was Katsumoto in the Last Samurai, he said, in the end, it's all perfect. And that's the path for me. That's my estocada, the path towards self-perfection through the warrior path. The gun is strict causality through the mechanism of engineering. I point, I pull, very functional, very practical, and I learn nothing from it other than the skill. Yeah.
Well, so is this why I always see you training with a live blade, and is this part of it?
Yeah, it's a very big part because one, you have a lot of self-awareness because there's a very slim margin for error. I make one mistake, or I'm too busy trying to get 1 million views, on a short, and then maybe that I didn't quite get my left hand out of the way as I do that back cut. Well, there I go talking to my insurance policy and say, guys, I don't know what to tell you. I was trying to go for 1 million followers and I lost my hand. Do you cover that? Right. So there's that piece. Is that in my policy? Maybe. So it raises one's sense of self-awareness. Am I paying attention? Am I focused here? Right. Am I here right now? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Mushin, which is no mind, right? And again, this is a TKL 007 training knife, comes with that package. If I'm training with just a trainer, I could do something as stupid as this, right? Mm-hmm. Or as silly as this, right? As I hand it off, I think and all of a sudden I just sliced open my hand. It will keep me from going too fast, right? Because I might do something silly. So if I have something as razor sharp as this, yeah, I better know exactly the placement of it, not up here, because I can do this, right? And then all of a sudden, this is how I'm gripping it. Now I'm in a very silly position. I have to make sure that I hit just that portion of my left hand along the mechanoreceptors. This is where you bench, right? This is where your barbell lands, so that when you have maximal control and force generation, it's right at the spot. Once I touch here, now I'm good to go. Now
Yeah.
I can cut across. And then when I'm at this point, now I can hand off. But I can only have that level of awareness in my own self, my own safety, but also of those around me. I mean, I have a girlfriend who lives with me, and I have a cat who lives with me. So I have two lives that I have to be protecting as I train. But that's not very far from what a real life scenario is, right? So always live training to maintain the highest level of awareness and precision. That's my philosophy.
That is actually my philosophy too. I'm far less accomplished than you, but I feel the same way. I got this recently um, to see what it was like. I have some nerve damage in my thumb, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll see what it's like to work with a lighter blade. And I immediately began to realize that this is just for playing with my daughters,
Hmm.
because with it's totally different from the actual Laredo Bowie,
Yeah.
and it's not really teaching me anything, especially that. And by the way, I feel you on the cats thing. I have a cat, my beloved little hunter killer, and I always make sure she's not in the room when I'm doing this stuff, because that would just be the that'd be the worst. Okay, so we're about to wrap here, but you mentioned something I really want to get to.
Yeah.
When you were talking about barbells and this portion of the hand, and
Hmm.
I know that a lot of our viewers here, not all of them, but a lot of them are like you and myself, men of a certain age,
Yeah.
and it was never a problem for me staying in good shape, even if I fell off the wagon for a while. I could, but now that I'm 53, it happens far less quickly. Do you
Hmm.
have any sort of advice, general advice? Maybe our viewers are not knife fighters or martial artists, are not interested in that aspect of knives, but they're still interested in remaining in shape or getting in shape. I know that you're certified under Pavel. Like,
Yep.
what do you recommend? How do guys our age stay in shape, get in shape, stay healthy?
Uh, two pieces of advice for our specific audience. Number one, only purchase a knife that you intend to train with, not the one that you're going to work with, the one that you're going to train with, the one that, sometime in the morning, your eyes aren't quite open yet. You take this out. This is how I learned Psyoc 3 of 9. First thing, wake up. I do want to, and it's a live blade, right? So you want to make sure that anytime you purchase a knife and it's live, it's something you intend to train with. Right? That's number one. But also number two, train with a knife, at least with 30 minutes straight, with your base heart rate somewhere zone 1, zone 2. So for practitioners our age, you're looking at somewhere between 110, maybe on the high end, 130 beats per minute, because that ensures that you are in that zone that keeps you, one, parasympathetic. So you still have access to fine motor skills. And when you move in this manner that's multiplanar, and it activates all of your myofascial lines because it's mostly circular. That creates a lot of synovial fluid flow, so that your joints, it gets all of that synovial fluid. It gets a lot of the aches and pains out of there. It gets your footwork going, so that the majority of your nerve endings are going to be along your hands and your feet. So when you're working barefoot in this manner, your foot ankle complex actually starts to come alive. This is what's kept me going. And my own powerlifting totals aren't necessarily anything to brag about, but it is over 1,000 for a guy my age to be able to do. And yeah, it is. It's over 1K powerlifting totals. 435 deadlift, 335 squat, 275 bench, but no major injuries, right? No major injuries. And I give credit to the Bali song, to the Bowie knife, to the katana, to keep me injury free, because I'm not just moving in a single plane. So I would say those would be the two things. But also, last but not least, from a self defense standpoint, you start to consider the life and death kind of things involved in these types of matters. So I would say those would be the two things. Pick a knife that you're going to train with. And then number 2, train every day, zone 1, zone 2 heart rate, and have fun with it. At least 30 minutes a day.
Rolando, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. We're going to continue this conversation a little bit for the patrons, but man, I feel I cannot wait to meet you at Blade Show. I assume you're going to be there this year.
I will be. Yes.
And I know we've met in person, but I'm always a scatterbrain there, so I didn't have a chance to really dig in with you. But this time, for sure. It's been a real pleasure. Rolando Garcia of Rolanda Estocada, the third, sorry.
Yeah.
It's great having you, man.
Same here. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Take care, sir.
Thank you.
Want to sell your custom knives online? With LaunchCart, you can easily create your own e-commerce store. No coding required. LaunchCart is designed for knife makers like you, with built-in tools to showcase your craftsmanship, manage orders, and grow your brand. It's fast, flexible, and even includes low-cost payment processing to help you keep more of your profits. Start your online knife store today at TheKnifeJunkie.com/launch and turn your passion into a business.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen, Rolando Garcia III of Rolanda Estocada. We talked about so much stuff, and we didn't even get to the Navaja, which we're going to do that in our patron interview. Be sure to check him out both on Instagram, but mostly on YouTube. I mean, he's got a great channel on YouTube. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, you will cherish it. All right, for Jim working his magic behind the switcher, I'm Bob DeMarco saying until next time, don't take dull for an answer.
Thanks for listening to the Knife Junkie podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review at reviewthepodcast.com. For show notes for today's episode, additional resources, and to listen to past episodes, visit our website, TheKnifeJunkie.com. You can also watch our latest videos on YouTube at TheKnifeJunkie.com/YouTube. Check out some great knife photos on TheKnifeJunkie.com/Instagram, and join our Facebook group at TheKnifeJunkie.com/Facebook. And if you have a question or comment, email them to bob@TheKnifeJunkie.com or call our 24/7 listener line at 724-466-4487, and you may hear your comment or question answered on an upcoming episode of the Knife Junkie podcast.